Thank you very much, and I will also be drawing upon Arthur's introduction in that we have discussed the implications of our work together on One North over many years. And you'll be seeing, in fact, this is an image of the early model. What I want to do is to try to weave together some of the ideas that we've heard over the course of the roundtable discussions. And there are so many wonderful themes that we could draw upon. But what I'll try to do is, in a relatively short while, touch on a few of the key ideas about the way that we may want to experiment together and take the city as a learning laboratory for a future. I think we have heard ways in which we will learn from the engineering of the periphery, the way we would use our understanding of environmental impact assessment tools. We've heard about a service-led innovation that is being experimented with at the City Institute. We've heard the way in which a developer like Ascendus is using their understanding of the real estate market to evolve an understanding of new spatialities. This kind of learning is something that we, as a community here, want to foster. And I think that's one of the things that an inter-roundtable is best suited to do. The thing that I would also like to say is that architecture plays a key role in this. And what I would also like to say, and to come back to Pedro's point, he figures that we should make sure that architects understand sociology, or perhaps real estate, or perhaps economics, and so on. We might be happy with all of these things. But as somebody who teaches architecture, I would often be happy if our students simply understood architecture. That would be a good thing to start with. Now, part of my reason for thinking that is that one of the things that's often easy for an architect to do is to quote a famous sociologist like Saskia Sassen or someone, then produce a very bad design and say, well, but after all, it tells us something about the underclass in the city. What we don't want to do is to misunderstand our own field. And I think that, and this is true whether we're talking about engineering, real estate management, architecture, or any other discipline. So Dominic tells us that he, in fact, can only read images. Well, this is good, in a way, because he's an architect. We want to make sure, above all else, that he understands how to read a drawing. And so I think one of the things that I want to do a little bit right now is to take you through some of the ideas about the way in which we learn from precedent in architecture, the way we develop prototypes to deal with new challenges, the way that we evolve those prototypes so that we can begin to discover new applications, the way that we use these potential applications to begin to initiate pilot projects, and how we can use this to start to understand platforms for urban learning. Because that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to understand how collectively we can look toward a future in which Kaohsiung, like many of the other cities in Taiwan, can work with multiple disciplines and with experts from many fields, and most especially with the platforms of economic action, of social action here in this country to develop new opportunities for urban development. So you've already seen from Arthur's presentation, these are all images from One North, that these are indications of an experimentation in the field of the way in which we would generate new workspace-driven urban environments. The challenge at the beginning of that project was to evolve a morphology for Singapore that was unlike what was there in Singapore before, that would absorb new investment, that would cultivate new patterns of social learning, and that would enable Singapore to attract talents from other countries and enable them to participate in the local economy. And what was also being done then was something that began to challenge the regulations of Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority. And very importantly, the mechanism of granting to JTC the capacity to take over as a contracting authority was rooted in the idea that Singapore would need to challenge its own political structures in order to learn. And so one of the roles of the master plan and the master planner was indeed to show the ways in which a new vision would invite Singapore to reconsider its planning regulations. Now here's another example. And in the lower part of this image, down here we have the project Rive Gauche across from Bercy, part of a larger strategy to rebalance the city of Paris towards its eastern perimeter up against the Périphérique, so part of a multi-dimensional series of differentiated projects, not one idea, but many ideas, to try to look for a new way of, instead of simply building another La Défense on the east side of Paris, would look for a multiplicitous way of engaging with the actual patterns of urban life and new economies to create a new kind of work-based environment that would also aim to improve the patterns of micro-mobility as we would be able to move from the 13th arrondissement down toward the Seine and then across to the area of Bercy, in a sense creating a new district within the city that had previously not existed because of the challenge of the infrastructure there. Now, when we look at this, you can see what kind of a challenge it was in generating urban connectivity and urban mobility. There were several different experiments then with different kinds of residential neighborhoods used to generate different patterns of street life, different patterns of residential life. And there was a great deal of experimentation in the morphology of the residential districts as supports for a new area for developing a site for ministries and education. Now, over time, this has turned, over time in a relatively short time, this has turned into quite a vibrant community here in Bercy. And so it's not, again, as Arthur was saying, these projects are not without their flaws, but they are very good examples of experimentation in urban learning. Now, here's another interesting case. This is Santa Monica in Los Angeles. And I'm going to be talking about this 3rd Street promenade right here, which is at this large building is a mall, and then this area is a pedestrianized zone. And it looks something like this. Now, at one point, early in the 20th century, this was a peripheral environment to downtown Los Angeles. It is now the most successful and vibrant commercial district in the west side of Los Angeles, in the community of Santa Monica. And what I think is interesting about this is the pathway towards learning how to build this environment. Today we would take this as being quite a normal kind of organization, but let's think about where the diagram came from. I'm going to draw now from a wonderful book by Alex Wall on the life and work of Victor Gruen. And Victor Gruen was one who experimented in the United States in a very adventurous way on the development of the suburban shopping mall. And so here we have one of his more canonical early efforts to understand the shopping mall as a tool for peripheral development. Now, how did this begin? It began because Victor Gruen was born in Vienna, where he was a shopfront designer. And what he was able to do was to understand the logic of using architecture to convert pedestrians into shoppers. He understood the way in which he would use shopfront design to, in a way, harness the energy of movement and get people to behave in a certain kind of way. When he moved to New York, he designed the shopfront on the left. When he moved to the western United States cities, then he designed the shopfront on the right, something that could be seen from an automobile. When he got to the suburbs, of course, there was a question, how do you ever create centrality in the American wastelands, the American sprawl of suburbs? And so he began to experiment with an idea, well, perhaps we would have something that would begin to organize a complex space around a single department store and then a series of minor businesses. And so the first prototypes looked like this. Then they began to evolve into things that would use two department stores and then create an axis between them. And of course they also began the designs evolved to use two-level open spaces that could be used as performance space so that they would become community centers as well. And then these became the starting point for an entire urban design for nodalized peripheral areas. Now the interesting thing was, we all know that it produced a series of shopping malls that we're not, in fact, always terribly happy with on the periphery. But there was a spin-off to this understanding, and it had to do with the rethinking of the city center. And in fact, Victor Grun's worked and said, well, why, if we're going to use parking structures and pedestrian environments on the periphery, why don't we think about using them in the city center? So he began to look at a solution for downtown Fort Worth in Texas. It was based on the same principle, evolved to a central city idea. And this was something that received a lot of support and interest from both politicians and from international planners. It was in many ways at the heart of some of the thinking behind the Lijnbaan in Rotterdam. And then it became piloted in, not in fact in Fort Worth in the end, but in the city of Fresno in California, where it evolved into a very interesting center city plan. Where did it finally get realized? In Santa Monica. Now, Victor Grun's work then is a way of understanding the pathway through a prototype that was an absolutely new idea pursued through architecture, applied in many locations, and ultimately applied in a location very different from where it began. Now, this is a kind of adventurousness and experimentation in architecture and urbanism we like to have our students practice, and here we are in Nangang. We've already heard at the beginning of these proceedings from Charles and some of the ways in which our workshop has generated a series of ideas for this, in a way I'll call it peripheral, because at the moment it's still suffering from the effects of having been peripheralized by patterns of development, declining industry, disjointed, fragmented urban elements on the fringe, but nevertheless part of a very promising corridor of development that runs all the way down through the country. Now, we believe that this needs to be evaluated by starting with the scale of the district. This is how you understand how you generate the critical mass and differentiation, the patterns of mobility that will give rise to modality so that you can, in fact, justify the development of transport infrastructure. And our students, together with those at the Graduate Institute of Architecture at NCTU, worked on developing these kinds of plans in a very rapid workshop. And what we're trying to achieve then through this is rapid learning based on understanding the platform of economic development for the area. So we looked at the way in which the music industry had precedents that were rooted in typologies that we could learn from in other countries, the way that these might be understood as offering particular opportunities for the Nangang area, the way in which that music platform actually would link up to software developers for streaming and digitalization, and the way in which that might connect in with the Nangang, the expertise in the Nangang software park. Now, we also, of course, are trying to understand some of the opportunities in the area. We've heard both Dominic and John talk about King's Place and also about the GTEC headquarters, which we saw as a resource for thinking about the future evolution of a civic-led urban architecture. In here, there's also an area of disused industrial buildings that our students were asking how might they evolve these and adapt them as centers of new kinds of service-led and cultural-led regeneration practices. And then ultimately, we might look at this in terms of the way in which both Dominics yesterday described an approach to urban area based on civic institutions and mobility. And this led our students to quickly, over a period of a couple of days, build a potential new model. Not the answer to the site, but a series of questions. What if we were to look at the fabric in an alternative way? And this is something that has then been used as the basis of the planning practice in many other places. So here we've got part of a master plan for Hamburg that is based upon an understanding of morphology, the potentials of precedent and type, and the formation of an urban fabric that is multi-use rather than a land use plan. These kinds of things then also led the students to think about the alternative approaches to the waterfront, where they could draw upon their experiences of Bilbao, the practices of waterfront regeneration there, and to then bring this back to an understanding of a case in Taiwan. Now, just to conclude in the final bits here, what we have seen is a range of very complex, very beautiful urban areas, urban regions, as we've come down through the country from Taipei through Yunnan to Kaohsiung, and we've seen a remarkable range of peripheral environments. Here's the new MRT station for Jubai near Hsinchu. We can see this preparing for a next generation of urban development structured around the high technology industries. We've seen also a very rural community in Bailang that has nevertheless the potentials of becoming a center of tourism, food production. We understand that here there's a famous diamond designer whose work has been exhibited in the Kennedy Center in New York in the same community. This is an indication of how linked and global. This is only where these two slides are really only 100 yards apart. Now, this gives us an opportunity to think about the connectedness of rural environments. We also saw we saw a series of food environments that could be harnessed for future platforms of development. Old sugarcane factories that are part of university cities. Now, I'm just going to finish up the way this relates to the work that our students do in London. This is another peripheral site, again, peripheralized by the economic patterns that have generated a fragmented industrial and post-industrial environment on the edge of London called the Lower Lee Valley. What our students ultimately tried to do was to create a plan of a similar size that Arthur is often referring to for a workspace integrated project, in which they begin to understand differentiated patterns of urban corridor formation. And they're doing that by thinking again about the platform for development. You can see what they're proposing is to integrate creative industries together with industries, together with research. And so they begin to ask about the nature of research environments, the way in which these might be combined with industrial environments, how there is a precedent in the typologies, which after all, typology should be understood not simply as a building, it's not simply hardware. Typology is selected through practice. Typology is in fact an indication of patterns of human use regularized over time. When we do a prototype, that's a speculation of future use. When we understand typology, it's a recognition that there is a sociology already in the architecture. And so what we see here in these examples from Zurich is a new approach to public space in industrial environments, one in keeping, not so much with the idea of a residential park, but something that is organized to amplify students then also look at the role of housing and civic environments, and research environments, and learning environments. And then they try to integrate this back into an understanding of a possible morphology that would give us the idea for a master plan. Now, all of this is really dependent on a kind of learning across the platform. These are images that I took a year ago in the Shui Shui Institute, or actually not a year ago, half a year ago. These are new designs for products made out of a waterproof paper that are made from recycled materials. Now, in Nangang and in the Lower Li Valley, in both places we have creative industries and we have recycling industries. In both places we have the opportunity to develop a new platform of economic development that is, as Arthur suggested, centered on workspace development. And what I would like to conclude with then is that the idea that this research that we're talking about jointly is one that understands precedent, the role of prototyping, the role of pilot projects, and the idea that this resides on an understanding of a platform that is going to be both locally intelligent and globally connected. Now, this is the sort of thing that I think INTA's communities of competence can help us support, is a pattern of concentrated research and sharing of information. And so I'd like to thank INTA for the opportunity of developing this. And what I think we would like to do is to continue this conversation over the coming years, perhaps with the assistance of INTA, to continue to develop these kinds of communities of competence and the research that goes into making the city a rapidly evolving laboratory of practice. Thank you very much.